Feel free during any of this to interrupt with questions or put questions in the chat or use the raise your hand feature. Any of that works. There are a few folks that are with us to help out as needed. My colleague Dave Sally is the technical coordinator for the Lancaster Clean Water Partners. Alma Felix is here from the Lancaster County Community Foundation. She's a program officer there. We also have Mike LaSala from Land Studies, that's on our CAP coordinator team. He provides a lot of technical expertise for this process. Okay, so we'll go ahead and dive in. So you guys are probably familiar with the Lancaster Clean Water Fund, but just in case you aren't, it encompasses this grant opportunity that we're talking about, the large implementation grant, but also two smaller ones, the community conservation and the small implementation grants as well. Those two just closed on this past Friday, so applications are in and being considered for those two. And then today is the opening of the large implementation grant round. But the fund as a whole serves as a catalyst for increased collaboration to achieve, hopefully efficiently, clean and clear water in Lancaster County by 2040, which is our mission at Lancaster Clean Water Partners. And it's intended to provide one location for flexible financial support for clean water efforts. So there is a set of eligibility criteria. The Lancaster Clean Water Fund is a donor advised fund of the Community Foundation. Most of the criteria is the same as any other grant opportunity through the Community Foundation. We'll dive into the first couple of points a little bit in just a second, but the rest of it is that you need to be either a nonprofit or a municipality and maintain current, or in the case of a municipality, be exempt from the PA Bureau of Charitable Organizations registration. And if you are a nonprofit, it needs to be current on filing the 990s. And projects, like all of you, are going to have projects that benefit residents of Lancaster County, and also be in good standing with any past grants too. So there are a couple of new policies at the Community Foundation. I will run through this really quickly, and then if anyone has questions, then you can jump in to answer. Okay. So the Community Foundation did a strategic planning process back in last fall and fall of 2021. You can see the values that they identified here, but two big questions bubbled out of that being, how do we understand and infuse equity more deeply in both the organization and the community? And also, how do we positively support bridge builders to connect different groups within the community? And so coming out of that were these two new policies on the Community Foundation's behalf. One's anti-hate and one is the non-discrimination policy. Although this is a donor advised fund, we didn't necessarily have to have adherence to these. The Lancaster Clean Water Partners felt like, of course we should. Why would we fund anything that was supporting hate or discrimination? So this is consistent with their policies for the reasons of elevating conversations about inclusion and equity. And of course, we want our donors to the Clean Water Fund and any donors and boards to know that they're supporting good organizations and that all the organizations and the projects are taking steps to be more equitable and inclusive. So that is the basis behind it. So one of the new things this year is that non-discrimination policy is required as an attachment. Alma, do you have anything you want to add to that? I know I went through that quickly.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So I did want to say though that the new policies, anti-hate and all of that does apply to all of our grants, even funds that are donor advised and all of that too. But that has a different process. So like you said, it's a requirement to attach it for competitive grants. And the non-discrimination policy that you upload should be as it applies to your organization. So that can mean different things depending on what organization you are. And then we do have various resources on our page, langfound.org-grants. If you'll see there's a section with eligibility criteria and resources, and you can see a sample on non-discrimination policy if you would like to view ours. There's also links to an information session about non-discrimination policies in your organization, and then links to other resources that can help you draft one if you do not have one.
Thanks, Alma. So now we're going to dive into the specifics of the large implementation grant. This is for grants between 100,000 and 500,000 to implement projects that support clean water, and specifically to support projects that are consistent and help us to achieve the Lancaster's Countywide Action Plan, or CAP. And I want to highlight here, it's nitrogen and phosphorus reductions is what we're trying to achieve with the CAP. So those are our goals, are set at nitrogen and phosphorus. So that's what we're looking for in these projects, is to help us to achieve that. Throughout, we'll refer to the CAP. There are links to the Countywide Action Plan, both on our website, on the info sheet, throughout the application once you're in there. So be referring back to that, because this is the basis of this funding. The funding is actually through DEP, through state funding, for implementing the Countywide Action Plan. And part of the strings attached, I guess, with the state funding is that projects need to be implemented by June of 2024. And of course, the quicker the better. So preference will be given to projects that can be implemented next year within the calendar year of 2023. Match is not a requirement, but it will improve one part of the scoring, which is the nitrogen efficiency score. That calculation is off of your grant request amount divided by the nitrogen loading reduction. So of course, if you have other funding leverage, then your grant request amount is going to be less, and it will improve your efficiency score. But again, match is not required. Eligible projects can be across the spectrum as far as different sectors, be it agricultural or urban, best management practices addressing stormwater, or runoff from, again, ag, things like implementing riparian buffers, stream restoration or wetland restoration projects are eligible. And again, you can see the full list of BMPs in the CAP. And of course, we're trying to implement projects here. Most of our funding should be going to implementation, but some of it is eligible for design and administration. A cap of 25% of the construction cost can be used for design and 5% for administration. New this year, you can submit a draft application. The deadline for that is September 2nd, and then we can provide feedback on your application as far as comments go, and then it'll be re-released to you by September 16th. And then you'll have a couple of weeks there to address any comments, make final edits, and resubmit by the final deadline of September 30th. A couple of other things to point out is that, again, this is state funding, and for any contracted labor, prevailing wage is required. And again, we don't require a match. Depending upon the specifics of your project, you may use it as a match for other sources, but do keep in mind it is state funding, and check with any other grantors as far as eligibility of that. And we do want to know, though, if you are planning to use any grant funding as match, so that we don't count it as match for something else. All right, moving on. So there are a couple of changes this year, and you'll notice that, this is the second round of this year, and that was done intentionally to try to coincide with timelines of other funding sources. We have learned from you all that it's hard, of course, for finding project funding and deciding between grant opportunities that all have different deadlines. So we made the due date be the end of September, partially because the NIFWITH awards, if you applied for NIFWITH for any of the same projects, should be announced earlier that month in September. So you should know by the application due date here if you have NIFWITH funding. And then for any of you that were considering Growing Greener funding, you saw that flow chart that if the project was to be implemented within 18 months, it wasn't eligible for Growing Greener. So this is the opportunity instead. But we wanted to go ahead and open it up so that the funding decisions will be made almost at the same time, not exactly. We are told that in December, DEP should be announcing Growing Greener decisions, and at the same time, the CAP allocations per county. And so we do not know at this point how much money we have to allocate to grants through this fund. However, our goal is to have a list of projects ready to go at the beginning of the year, and our advisors can be scoring and deciding what order of projects to fund, so that once we find out the allocation in December, we can go ahead and issue contracts for that amount of money that we have to allocate. So the overarching goal is to get projects on the ground faster and help where we can in that regard of timelines and a little bit of simplicity. I know it's still a complicated process though. And we have simplified the application in a couple of ways where we could while still getting the information that we need. All right, so I am going to go through just how you get to the application. When you go to the Lancaster County Community Foundation website, at the web address on the top here, and this will bring you to your grant page, to the grant page of the Community Foundation. If you scroll down a bit on that page, you'll see this in the screenshot, our grant opportunities. And you'll click on the Clean Water Fund in the middle where it says view. And then the next page, again, you'll have to scroll down a little bit. Under access the application, you click apply under grant portal, and that will bring you to the Community Foundation's grant portal. Fountain is the system that they use. If you already have a login, that's great. If not, you'll need to create one. And then you log in there, and you will need an access code to get to the application. And to get that, you contact me, either email me or call me. My contact info is at the end of this presentation. But I don't need anything major. I don't need a lengthy narrative, but I do need to know just, what you're thinking, what you're planning. And when we have that brief conversation, you can ask any questions about does this fit? Any other questions you may have about eligibility, and I can help, as much as I can at that time and provide the access code. And then you fill the access code out on that site, and the grant opportunity will show up below, and then you can start your application there. We do already have the PDF of application questions on our website, though, that you can use to get started before you even start the application within the portal. And that is at our website, which is shown at the bottom of this slide, lancastercleanwaterpartners.com/cleanwaterfund. That does have the info sheet, the application questions. It'll have the recording of this webinar and other resources like the BMP spreadsheet that we'll talk about in a little bit. And you can also view past projects that have been funded through the Clean Water Fund on that site as well. So the application is pretty straightforward as far as implementation projects go. It'll, of course, ask for the organization information and contact information, and then it will get into the project specifics, like the project summary. Of course, like all grant applications, pay attention to the character limits. Most of them have plenty of room, but just be aware of that. Do keep in mind that, especially for the Clean Water Fund, we want it to be simple. So don't, feel the need to add a bunch of fluff. We are trying to figure out what you're doing and get to the point. We do want the information, but please do be concise where you can. Using bullet points is perfectly fine. I think our advisors will appreciate if it's succinct. So even though the character limits may be aplenty for a lot of the questions, you don't feel the need to fill up the maximum limits there. So it'll also ask about property information, things like, what is the address where you're doing this project? Who's the owner? Is there a stream on the property? And if so, does it have a forested riparian buffer of at least 35 feet? Or are you planning to put a buffer there? And then the rest of the application questions are also pretty much the scoring criteria. So, how is your project addressing the CAP goals? So again, refer back to the CAP. The timeline and implementation plan. So really, what are you planning to do? And be specific with your timeline. Like, when are you doing the permitting? When are you anticipating to go out to bid? We want to hear about community engagement. So include that in your timeline too. Partners, be it watershed groups, municipalities, if you aren't the municipality, any community organizations or neighborhood groups, make sure to tell us who's involved and what their role is too. Community connections, this is a change this year. This question now encompasses what we were trying to get at with the equity question in past years. But we weren't getting great answers to that. So we do want to know in the community connections question, how are you involving the community? And what are you doing outside of, checking a box for a token public meeting? Are you involving residents and the planning process? Are you tabling at events? Are you letting them provide input into what this design looks like, or voting on it? Are there going to be opportunities for education after it's implemented? Are folks going to be helping with the plantings or what have you associated with the project? That kind of stuff. Community connections question also, on the other side of that, can ask about connections to larger initiatives within either the community or the watershed. And we have the lens of conservation here. So any watershed plans that the project may be helping to implement, the delisting strategy, if it's a part of that, other plans along those lines. You don't need to list like every plan under the sun that, this may be sort of connected to, but if it's a direct connection, we want to know about it there. Maybe the landowner immediately upstream has already implemented a project, and this is continuing that momentum. That would be a great thing to include there. And the next one is sustainability and maintenance. And again, this is a bit twofold. One is we want to make sure that applicants are thinking about what may hinder sustainability of the project, like flooding, or if it's an agricultural project and the farmer changes operations, or if there is a drought, making sure the trees are watered within the first couple of years, if it's street trees. And then the other part of this is the actual maintenance. So who will be doing the maintenance? And then we want to see that maintenance plan uploaded here. The last thing is leveraged funding. This is not a requirement, again, match is not required, but ending funder, including DEP, wants to see what funding may be leveraged by their funding. So as an example, if you're requesting funding for stormwater BMP that's a part of a larger capital project, you can include that there, that this is, the total park renovation or street project is X amount, so that we know it's part of a bigger package. And this is also where you would include if you're planning on counting any award here as match on another grant. There are a lot of attachments required. The first couple are pretty standard, including the non-discrimination policy that Alma mentioned, and the board of directors and financial review for the organization. And then we get into the project specific information. So we do want to see the operation and maintenance plan, a landowner letter of commitment. If the applicant is the landowner, you can just attach a PDF saying so. We do want to see photos of the before. I think there's spots for 2 pictures on there. A project map and the budget worksheet. I don't have the budget worksheet on this presentation today, but it's pretty simple. And let me know if you have any questions. It's just, a construction line, a contractual line, which is design and engineering. Again, any grant request is capped at 25% for that. And it says that on the budget worksheet. You just download it from the application and fill it out and re-upload that on there. And there's a line for administration and signage if you're including it in the project. And you'll also include, if you do have match funding, that on the budget worksheet. We will talk about the best management practice spreadsheet in just a minute, but that asks for the grant request amount for the construction of each BMP. And then there'll be a total on that spreadsheet. So that total construction amount should match what you have on your project budget worksheet as the construction request amount. And for all of these, there is a cap on the size of the attachments, both per attachment and overall for the application. So if you're running into problems with file size, you can always just email it to me. Or if there are other attachments that really help tell your story, like construction plans, then you can always just email that to me or include a Dropbox link in your email. All right, we're going to dive into some specifics here of the BMP spreadsheet. Dave put a link to the spreadsheet in the chat. So that's what you'll use. You download that and then fill it out for your project, and then you will attach it onto the application. We have Mike LaSala here with us from Land Studies that will explain this, the reasoning and how to fill this out more.
Thanks, Megan. So as Megan said, this will be the spreadsheet to enter your actual BMPs proposed for implementation. It's important for the CAS name to singularly list the actual CAS BMPs you're proposing to implement. If you go to the next slide, and we tried to generate a reference table, because there's a lot of BMPs that we may call it something different locally, or might have a couple different names, but there's a specific CAS BMP that those individual BMPs fall under. As an example here, urban tree planting, and I put this on here because there is a difference between forest planting and tree planting, and the rule of thumb you can kind of follow is, if you see the underlying land use roads and buildings and turf grass. So if you essentially have impervious surfaces, I'm going to say within about 80 feet of your proposed improvement area, you're going to want to call that urban tree planting. If you do not have any impervious within 80 feet, over 100 feet away, that's urban forest planting. And we can help you, with classifying those BMPs. But what we're asking for is that your applications, instead of just arbitrarily, say as an example, rain garden, calling out a rain garden, if you could call out bioretention as its official name. This helps us just from an efficiency review standpoint, and ultimately from a reporting standpoint for the CAP and the BMPs that are actually entered into CAST. On the application, you also see a question asking about underlying land use and reporting units. So the underlying land use, that's more of a quality checkpoint for us, just to make sure you've actually considered or cross-referenced the BMP with the land use. And it becomes important because there are a couple BMPs where the underlying land use might change how we want to classify that. The reporting units, you're going to see mostly either in an area like acres, but most of the urban suburban BMPs are in acres treated is the question. Is it wants to know, as an example, if you do propose a rain garden or bioretention, is what is the size of the drainage area that's being treated by that rain garden? And so on the application, you would put, could be a half an acre, could be 5 acres, just depending on the size or whatever you're proposing. Next slide. One thing that's important to note, and this is just in case any application has improvements proposed that are tied with development or redevelopment. So you say you're getting an NPDES construction permit, and you have the worksheets to calculate, and you have to control some post-development runoff. We technically classify that as runoff reduction performance standard. And as a locale and even a state, we're actually granted higher water quality reductions if it's following a permit requirement. And you can see based on the list, other local BMP names. I mean, it's essentially every BMP you can think of that qualifies, as long as it's part of that post-development. Next slide. Now, if you have ag, any sort of ag considerations in your application, it follows the same mantra, and that we have a lot of different common names, and what we want to do is be able to sort of classify it by its official CAST BMP name. This is where the underlying land use might become more important where you're proposing it. For example, buffers. If it's more related to crops with the buffer, whether you're putting a fence in or not, it's just a forest or grass buffer. It has to be pastured to be classified as a buffer with exclusion fencing. Most of these are also, the reporting units are in the total area, acres, or acres, you can see in acres and buffers. Animal ones, anything related to animals, you can either sort of report that as, and it'll be on this reference chart, number of systems, or as an animal count or animal units. Can be reported in any one of those 3 ways. Next slide. And we don't yet, and it's a very common one in applications, is heavy use area protection improvements. And there's technically not a CAST BMP yet for heavy use area protection. They are developing one. Right now, we essentially would require, we ask you to provide sort of a little bit more of a breakdown of what's being proposed for the heavy use area protection. Usually, most of it will fall under barnyard runoff control, as you can see there. But it has a little bit to do with the underlying land use at the same time. And if there is a question on potentially the breakdown or individual components, like I said, you can shoot an email to Megan, saying, hey, this is kind of what we're proposing. How, can you give us some guidance on perhaps exactly the CAST BMPs, and we'll be happy to help you out with that, to make sure we're getting in the right units. I believe that's all I had. Is there any questions? I kind of fired through that quickly, but yeah, it's clear as mud. It shouldn't be any issues. So,
Mike, I'll go
Yeah.
back to the main like screenshot of the BMP spreadsheet just
Mhm.
to kind of recap what you need to see here.
Yeah, so there you list the actual CAS BMP name, and feel free, if it helps you, to put, as an example, say tree planting, and then you put in parentheses for CAS urban tree planting. If it helps you qualify it that way, that's fine as well, as long as we see the CAS BMP name. The underlying land use, it's sort of a quality control checkpoint to make sure that BMP does apply under that land use. Quantity would be based on the units, that's whether it's acres treated or total acres. As I gave the example on the rain garden, if you're treating 1 acre, your quantity would be 1, your units would be acres treated. And total construction costs, I think that's self-explanatory.
And that is for the grant request amount, right? That we're at. Yeah. So this is what, you could list out multiple BMPs here, but your total construction cost here should equal what's on the budget worksheet.
Yeah, you don't necessarily need to give a construction cost by individual BMP. You don't need to, but you can if you do want to.
All right. Any questions here before we move on? Okay. Thanks, Mike.
No worries.
So this is the scoring criteria that we're using. A large chunk of it is nitrogen loading reductions. And Dave just shared sorry, I went backwards here. Dave just shared the link for the scoring criteria, so you can read a little bit more detail on that link for the criteria. But this is an overview. Out of 100 points between these first 2 bullets, 40 points is really the nitrogen reductions. Again, it's using CAST based off of what you put on that spreadsheet. We'll calculate that. So you don't need to use any other modeling. You don't need to do it yourself as far as estimating reductions. You don't need to be providing estimated nitrogen reductions or any other reductions within the narrative. We will calculate that to do the scoring so that's all done consistently. And then the second bullet is nitrogen efficiency. And that's where we take into account the grant request amount divided by the pounds of nitrogen reduced. So that looks at a couple of things within efficiency. We know we want to put get the most bang for the buck. So we'll look at historic efficiency rates of what kinds of BMPs do have the best efficiency for nitrogen reduction, but also, looking at how much you're requesting grant wise. And so that's where any match that you may have may help that calculation a little bit. And then the opportunity score on the collaborative watershed mapping tool. Again, you do not have to provide this in this application. You have had to in the past, but I've taken that question off of this. We'll use your address that you provide for the project and we'll find that out. But if you want to look it up, it is on the collaborative watershed mapping tool available on our website. That's under the prioritization tab, and you would look up the HUC 12 watershed and click on it and it'll give you the opportunity score. The next one also, you don't have to provide anything for, we'll look it up, is the disadvantaged communities. This is all based upon census data. So again, we'll take the project address and compare it to a map. And this is consistent with EPA's guidelines for their most effective basins funding. They have a set aside for disadvantaged communities. So we'll be using their same criteria. It does take into account more data points than just low income. There are other things like percentage of high school graduates or very low or high age concentrations within the census tracts. So we'll use a map to get that part of the scoring. That one and the opportunity score were 5 points each. And then the next one's partners, which is worth 10 points out of the 100 points. So are you collaborating with local partners? Have you contacted the watershed group? Are they helping with the project? Is the municipality supportive? Are you being innovative and, working with the Boys and Girls Club down the street to, educate their kids on the project, things like that. And you'll see that the partners and the ones below that are all consistent with what the application questions are. So community connections, again, are you really trying to connect your community members into the project planning and implementation, especially those who may be traditionally marginalized or disadvantaged. And that could include some future opportunities for tours or involving school kids or other youth serving organizations. The maintenance plan, and we do want to see it attached. Is it realistic and achievable? And the timeline, same question there, is it realistic and achievable? And more preference will be given to projects that can be achievably completed in 2023. And consistency with the CAP, because that's what this is all about. Is it consistent to the priorities there? So again, refer to the CAP goals. So we do have lots of resources available on our website. It's listed there under at the top in orange. Countywide action plan that we keep referring to is available on our website. So is the collaborative watershed mapping tool. Aside from the opportunity score, there's lots of useful information on there, such as the impaired streams, what the impairment causes are, where monitoring points are. Some implementation project sites are available on there. Watersheds generally. There's also a partners and resource inventory available on our website that was produced by Penn State. And so if you are looking for additional project partners, that may be a good place to go to see who may be able to provide some expertise that you may not have thought of before. All right, and also on our website are the large implementation grant specific resources, like this webinar will be on there, application questions, the scoring criteria, all of that we've been over. So just some general tips to start early with everything, the application itself, but also building partnerships, building relationships. It takes a long time. We do want to see that the projects are well thought out, and we want your project to succeed. So do start early. In those early conversations, a lot of times there will be some innovative ideas that you might could include in your project planning, or ideas for efficiency, where you could do one project to achieve multiple goals. So go ahead and start those conversations. And we know that especially in today's atmosphere of everything taking, forever and costing a lot more than we anticipated, that you need a solid plan for how to get around those obstacles that are going to come up inevitably. So make sure you have a plan about who's doing what, how to overcome anything that may come up, and don't forget maintenance in that plan too. Who's going to do it and how, and involve residents early and often. All right, so say you're awarded a grant, you'll find out in early January again. So you'll sign a grantee partner agreement and provide a W-9 for your organization. We require quarterly reports in Foundant, which is the same system that you'll do the application in through the Community Foundation. So those reports will be available in there, and we'll also include reimbursement requests in those same quarterly reports if you have a request at that time. For the reimbursement request, we'll need copies of the W-9s for any contractors detailed invoices, including detail for any design invoices. What do they do under that invoice specifically, like what BMP were they working on? For construction, we will need certified payroll showing prevailing wage and as-built for BMPs. Those can be plans that are marked up to use as the as-built. And then we require a final report. Any construction, which is any of this funding, requires a final construction check by Conservation District staff prior to releasing funding. So for that, they will need everything that I just listed to go out and do that check before they'll issue a check. So again, to recap the timeline, early January for the notification, and then the funding period will go for 18 months through mid-2024. And the general process is, again, you contact me. My contact information is on the right side here. Share just, a little bit about the project, what you're thinking, what you're planning, and I'll provide you with an access code to get into the application, and you follow the steps that we talked about to access the application on the Community Foundation website. And again, they're due September 30th, and you're encouraged to submit a draft application by September 2nd for feedback, and then we'll re-release that to you by the 16th for addressing any comments and final edits before you submit by the 30th. All right, so we have plenty of time for questions.
Looks like Rupert has a question.
Okay, hi, Rupert.
Hey, Megan. A couple of questions, actually. And the first one is the last slide that you presented said that there's a final inspection by the Lancaster Conservation District. That one there. Prior to release of funding, is this a reimbursement or is it the final? If it's between 100,000 and 500,000, is it a pure reimbursement grant, or is this the last increment of the funding release?
It is all reimbursement based. We also have Laurel at our Longenecker on the call here that has been administering this grant up until now. She's getting ready to go and leave, but she might can weigh in on some of this. So it is all reimbursement based, but I think if you would have multiple BMPs, you could do it after completion of one BMP, but the district staff, something needs to be completed for them to look at to issue a reimbursement.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Laurel, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think if I'm understanding Rupert's question, it is all reimbursement based, but like Megan said, there has to be a completed BMP that they're able to go out and verify in order to disperse the reimbursement funding.
Gotcha, that helps. The other question was a bit broader in terms of what qualifies as a match. The first element was, it sounds like you can't use Growing Greener as a match, and that must work both ways. So you can't use Growing Greener as a match for this, and we can't use this as a match for a Growing Greener grant. Correct?
Technically, no, but we're not asking for official match either. So any state funding could also be going into the same broad project for our purposes, but we're not counting it as match per se. But you would probably want to count any funding awarded here as match for Growing Greener, so that it wouldn't be allowed the other way.
Okay, I think I understand that. that you mentioned you have an awful lot of effort that's going to be expended on community connections, partnership development, and outreach to residents. Is any of that eligible as an in-kind match, say, for a watershed organization like mine to go against the project, or is that just an overhead that we need to bear, and the only matching funds would be related to the actual project itself?
I mean, the short answer would be yes, that's totally eligible, but I don't, again, match is not required, and I don't know that it'll help in the efficiency score, which is the only place that would really come into play for our scoring, because it's going to be the same amount of grant funding for implementation regardless of in-kind match. So of course it is helpful, but also we encourage the use of the 5% that we allow for admin for that kind of thing too.
So help me understand, I'm sorry, but help me understand this efficiency score. It says that it encouraged you to have, I thought it encouraged you to have a match so that your efficiency was greater for the funds that you were requesting.
Yeah,
And
so that would be on the construction funding.
Okay.
So I don't know, Mike, if you can help clarify the efficiency score more, but I'm pretty sure it's just taking into account the construction costs for the BMP. And that,
So the efficiency score, yeah, so it's looking at, it's essentially looking at what your total cost is and using the cast rates to determine the dollar per pound efficiency. So as an example, say you have a $100,000 project, but you are providing match from whatever it is of like $50,000. The efficiency is going to be used against your $50,000 ask, not against the whole project. So we're looking at it from an efficiency standpoint of the dollars being distributed or allocated under the program. Does that help, Rupert?
and Mike, how,
Yep.
is that just construction? Like if they're including some design funding in the budget or admin, that doesn't take into account that part of the budget?
Yes, we will. We'll actually look at it. We have the rates and we can look at it from the total startup and implementation costs, which includes the design and any soft costs, to just what what a construction cost is for a BMP.
Okay, well, Rupert, I think that means that yes, any in-kind match that you would have would help a little bit there.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Laurel?
Oh, this actually might be me for some reason raising my hand. It's Emily West from Land Studies.
Okay.
I was just wanting to clarify, because I forget from the first grant round this year. Do we need a formal landowner agreement as part of the application submittal if it's a municipality's going after a project and it's on a private property?
We do need landowner permission. I would think go ahead and do a formal landowner agreement so you don't have to do it later, but we would at least need a letter.
A letter, okay. It doesn't have to be like, it's not like Growing Greener that you have a formal form or something like that.
I don't think we have a certain form that's required.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any final questions? Great. Well, thank you all. Again, refer to our website for lots of resources, including the info sheet and application questions and all. All right. Well, have a good afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.